I'm going to talk about a question that I get asked by kids a lot, and I am going to rely a little bit on my friends for some help with this one. But I often get asked by kids how you know when your writing is good. Like, how do you know when what you've done is good? It's usually good enough is the actual phrase that they give me. And of course, my first question to them at that point is good enough for what? Because it's all about like what's the purpose of the writing that you're doing and what is it that you're hoping to get out of it. And usually they will say to me that they've written a novel, they're 12, they've written a novel and they want to get it published, and how will they
Yeah.
know when it's good enough? And so then, of course, we have to apply a whole different set of parameters to it. But the thing I always say to them is that basically it doesn't matter what you're writing, it doesn't matter who you're writing it for, it doesn't matter what you're writing it for. Most of the time you won't think it's good enough. Like, most writers will tell you that they never know when their writing is good enough, and they still, even when they're in the middle of writing anything or they've finished writing anything, particularly when you're in the middle, I have to say, you generally think that it's the worst thing that anyone's ever written, because that's just how you feel. Because when you are writing something, you are putting something of yourself onto the page, you are putting something of yourself, on display for other people to read, give you feedback on, and it's a very difficult thing to do, and you will never ever think that it's good enough, because if you are waiting for you to feel like it's good enough, chances are you will never submit it anywhere. You will never send it anywhere. You will never show it to anyone. It will sit in a cupboard or in your drawer and never be seen again. So you kind of have to push past that feeling of wondering, of thinking it has to be perfect. It has to be, an absolutely perfect piece of writing, or it's never going to be good enough for anything. Got to get past that. And most of the writers who are published are people who have pushed beyond that into, you know what, I'm just going to put it out there and have a go. Because that's when you're going to get published, or that's when you might, win the prize for the short story competition, or that's when you might get that A that you're seeking in English, or whatever it is that you're trying to do, is when you push beyond that feeling of this is not good enough into I'm going to be brave and I'm going to submit this anyway, and I'm going to see what happens. So I wrote a blog post on AllisonTait.com a couple of years ago where I went to a whole bunch of amazing authors, adult authors and authors for children, to ask them the question, like, how do you know? How do you know when your writing's good enough? And I got a couple of great responses that I'll share with you. So Nova Wheatman, who is a children's author that we talk about, we've actually mentioned, I was actually thinking about this the other day. This is actually the Nova Wheatman podcast because we
Fangirl
do mention
podcast.
about her. We do talk about her very regularly. But she is one of the authors that I asked, and she says that she doesn't always know when her writing is good enough. So
Dude, she's Nova Wheatman.
she's Nova Wheatman, and she doesn't know. But
Oh,
what she
dude.
does do is she says send off. We're talking about, sending it to her publisher. She sometimes sends it before it's ready, but she sends it when she feels excited by it. So when she's
Oh, I
excited by
love that.
something, yes, even if it's not perfect, it's got something about it that makes her feel excited. And then she says, I've usually done a few drafts before I find that. So that's something that I always say to kids when I talk to them at school talks, is that um, you have to actually work through your writing a couple of times. You have to edit your work to really make it the best that it can be. So if you want it to be good enough, you have to at least have done some work to it. And then, as Nova says, you want to feel excited by it. So that's her tip. Belinda Morell, best-selling internationally published author of children's fiction, says, I'm never sure that it's good enough. So there you go, again, which is why I love deadlines, because at that point I just have to send it off. So that's another tip that I always give
Mm.
kids when I'm going to workshops and things like that. aim for something. Like aim for a competition, aim, to kind of put a deadline on your work. And that way you have to send it. You have to get the feedback, because the best way to get better at writing is to practice and to get feedback and to actually apply that feedback. So I always really encourage kids who do like to write to enter those competitions, and there are quite a few of them out there, and we do share.
We
We
do.
do share anything we see. We share in the Your Kids Next Read Facebook community. So if you've got kids who love to write, be part of the community, because we will share anything we see, any competitions for kids that we see. And there's poetry competitions, there's short story competitions, lots of different things. Putting a deadline on things is a great way to get kids to move forward with their writing, and that's something that we often recommend. And Oliver Pomervan, who is an award-winning author of, often very funny children's fiction, says that he knows when it's good enough when he reads it out loud. He reads the first page of whatever he's written out loud, and if he can hear the heart of the story beating
nice.
in that first page, then he knows that it's okay, it's ready to go, it's okay to send off. It's never going to be perfect. And I think that that's something that every writer needs to learn, no matter what age they are. It's never going to be perfect. So what you're aiming for is to push through that question of, is this good enough, to the point where I'm excited by this, I'm going to submit it somewhere just to see.